Hello everyone, I'm Eric Bredden, and today we're back with another exciting storyline. Please like, share and subscribe to my channel. The Young and the Restless. Spoilers. Daniel and Tessa's love was always a point of contention for Phyllis. Why wouldn't she approve? For Phyllis, the situation involving Daniel and Tessa had been silently building up and erupting for weeks. She had never trusted the relationship from the start. Phyllis had confronted Tessa and told her to get out of Daniel's life, and Tessa had cried. And now, witnessing him sinking deeper into what she believed would ultimately hurt him, she felt a familiar fear disguised as anger. Phyllis was terribly wrong. She was prejudiced against Tessa. Why? To her, Tessa represented uncertainty, drama, and a past still entangled with someone else. Tessa and Mariah were increasingly struggling, and they weren't even divorced yet. How could Daniel build a future with someone whose previous marriage had just ended? For Phyllis, it felt like a chaotic mess of emotions about to explode. But love rarely follows the rules others try to impose on it. Daniel knew Tess was suffering terribly from her mother's misguided words, and he had warned Phyllis before. Where Phyllis saw danger, he saw a woman trying to rebuild her life after making difficult choices. Was Daniel completely right? In a mother's eyes, they would keep their child away from trouble. But his feelings for Tessa grew stronger, despite everything, not weaker. And the more people tried to separate them, the more determined he became to be by her side. Tessa held up the pregnancy test and showed Daniel that she was pregnant. Daniel was overjoyed and hugged Tessa tightly, but Phyllis secretly witnessed this scene. She was furious and rushed towards them. Even Daniel, who had fiercely defended their relationship, looked stunned by the news. But that shock quickly transformed into something else. Joy. A pure, unexpected joy spread across his face as reality gradually became clear. For him, this wasn't a scandal or a problem. It was the beginning of a new life, a new responsibility, and perhaps the most meaningful chapter of his life. Daniel was overjoyed, happy, and said they would get married without needing anyone's permission. They would move to another city to live. However, Phyllis heard something entirely different in Tessa's announcement. To her, the pregnancy didn't seem like a miracle. It seemed like a trap. Years of experience had taught Phyllis to question motives, to look for hidden aspects in every situation. She couldn't shake the feeling that Tessa was using her pregnancy to hold Daniel captive, to bind him to a relationship that Phyllis believed he might regret one day. In Phyllis's mind, this wasn't a coincidence or fate. It was a strategy. The simmering anger within her suddenly erupted. Before anyone could stop her, Phyllis lunged forward. Her hands swung out, grabbing a handful of Tessa's hair with incredible force. The room descended into chaos as she began screaming accusations, her voice trembling with rage and disbelief. She accused Tessa of manipulating Daniel, of trapping him for life. The words poured out like a storm that had been waiting too long to erupt. Tessa tried to defend herself, but the attack came too quickly, too violently. Mariah, standing nearby, was frozen in horror. She could barely comprehend what she was seeing. The woman she still loved, the woman she once believed would always be a part of her life, was now being dragged into a brutal confrontation that seemed unstoppable. Then Daniel arrived. He heard the screams at the end of the hallway and rushed in just in time to witness the worst moment. The sight of his mother attacking Tessa stunned him with disbelief. For a split second he couldn't move. Then instinct spoke. Daniel pushed Phyllis away from Tessa with enough force that she stumbled backward. The room fell into a deathly silence as he stared at his mother, anger and confusion tearing at his face. "What the hell are you doing, Mother?" The question hung between them like a knife. Phyllis looked at her son, breathing heavily, her hands still shaking from the confrontation. For a moment she didn't even seem to recognize how far things had gone. All she could see was the threat she believed was standing in front of him. The fear of losing Daniel to a life she didn't trust had completely taken control. Daniel, on the other hand, had reached a breaking point. He couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. His own mother, the woman who had always fought for him, had now become the person attacking the woman carrying his child. The realization cut deeper than either of them expected. The argument that followed was no longer just about Tessa. It became a painful collision between a mother who believed she was protecting her son and a son who felt suffocated by that protection. Years of unresolved tension spilled into the open as their voices rose, each word sharper than the last. And in the middle of it all stood Mariah. Her eyes filled with tears she couldn't hold back any more. The pain she felt was almost impossible to describe. She and Tessa had not even finalized their divorce yet. Their history, their love, the life they had built together, it was all still painfully real to her. And now she was forced to watch as everything unraveled in the most heartbreaking way possible. Tessa carrying Daniel's child wasn't just shocking news. For Mariah, it felt like the final confirmation that the life she once believed in was truly gone. The air in the apartment was thick, suffocatingly still, save for the rhythmic, hollow ticking of the wall clock. Tessa Porter stood in the doorway, her keys slipping from her numb fingers to hit the hardwood floor with a sharp, metallic clatter. The sound echoed in the cavernous silence, but Mariah Copeland didn't flinch. Mariah stood by the window, her silhouette cut sharply against the grey Genoa city skyline, her posture rigid, her arms crossed like a fortress wall. When she finally turned to face her wife, the look in her eyes, a chilling, hollow void devoid of the warmth that had defined their love story, sent a jagged shard of ice straight through Tessa's heart. "I want a divorce," Tessa Mariah said. Her voice did not shake. It was not laced with tears or the familiar desperate pleas for understanding that usually accompanied their arguments. It was a flat, clinical execution. Immediately, Tessa's breath hitched, her mind struggling to process the syllables. "Mariah, what are you saying? We were just talking about therapy, about—" "There is no therapy." Mariah cut her off, her tone slicing through the room like a freshly honed blade. "There is no fixing this. I am done. I want out, and I want it done now." Tessa took a tentative step forward, her hands raised in a placating gesture, as if approaching a wounded, dangerous animal. "Babe, please. You're hurting. We've been through so much, the stress, the trauma. You're not thinking clearly. We love each other. Don't tell me what I am thinking." Mariah's voice suddenly cracked like a whip, the raw, visceral anger finally bleeding through her icy veneer. "I have never been thinking more clearly in my entire life. I am cutting the dead weight, and to make sure you understand exactly how serious I am, I want my share. I want half of everything, the savings, the investments, the royalties from your music. I want a significant portion of our shared assets, and I will not let you walk away with a dime that belongs to me." Tessa recoiled as if she had been physically struck. The demand for money, for assets, was so entirely uncharacteristic of the woman she had married. Mariah had never cared about the finances. Their love had been built on emotional connection, on surviving the storms of Genoa City together. Money. You're talking about money right now, Mariah. I don't care about the accounts. I care about times us, asterisk. Why are you doing this? Why are you trying to burn our entire life to the ground? "Because there is nothing left to save," Mariah shouted, her face flushing with a sudden terrifying rage. She closed the distance between them, her eyes wide and manic. "You want to move on. You want to pretend like everything is perfect and maybe start a new little family, have a baby with someone else. Let me make one thing perfectly clear to you, Tessa. If you even think about having a child with someone else, I will go after Dominic." The name dropped between them like a live grenade. Tessa's blood ran cold. "Dominic, Mariah, what are you talking about, Dominic? Is Abby and Chance's son. Devon is his father. You were his surrogate. You have no legal claim to him, and what does he have to do with us?" "I carried him," Mariah screamed, pressing her hand to her stomach, the phantom pains of her pregnancy and the trauma of her kidnapping flashing behind her eyes. He was mine, and if you think you can just discard me, go find some donor and have a separate child. While we are still legally bound to each other, I will show you exactly what I am capable of. I will file for full custody of Dominic. I will drag Abby, Chance, Devon, and you into a courtroom, and I will tear everyone's lives apart. Tessa shook her head, tears finally spilling hot and fast down her cheeks. You're scaring me, Mariah. This is delusional. You can't just take a baby from his parents because you're angry with me. Watch me, Maria hissed, stepping so close Tessa could feel the heat radiating from her. I have already spoken to a lawyer. I will argue that you are emotionally unstable, that you are unfit to be a mother. How do you think a judge will look at you? A woman still entangled in a bitter, high-stakes divorce, desperately trying to have a separate child with someone else, while her current wife is fighting for the child she birthed. I will paint you as reckless, emotionally volatile, and completely incapable of providing a safe environment. I will destroy your reputation before I let you play house, while I'm left with nothing. The sheer malice in Mariah's meticulously crafted threat pushed Tessa into an unfathomable abyss. This wasn't just a breakup. This was a declaration of war. Tessa realized with a sickening lurch in her stomach that she was being shoved headfirst into a complex, vicious legal battle. The woman she loved was weaponizing her deepest traumas, turning her lingering postpartum grief and surrogate attachment into a scythe to cut Tessa down. Tessa was facing serious, career-ending, life-ruining accusations from her own wife. You need help, Mariah, Tessa whispered her voice, trembling with a mixture of profound grief and rising terror. You are sick. This isn't you. Get out, Mariah commanded, turning her back to the woman who had once been her entire world. And expect to hear from my attorneys. Across town, the atmosphere inside Crimson Lights was usually a comforting blend of roasting coffee beans and warm pastries, but today the air felt suffocatingly heavy. Sharon Newman stood behind the counter, her hands mechanically wiping down the espresso machine, though her eyes were fixed on nothing. The bell above the door chimed, and Devon Hamilton walked in. His jaw was set, his shoulders tense beneath his tailored suit. He didn't bother ordering. He walked straight to the end of the counter, his dark eyes clouded with a deep, unsettling anxiety. Sharon Devon said, his voice low, ensuring the few patrons scattered around the patio couldn't hear. We need to talk. Now. Sharon dropped the rag, her maternal instincts instantly flaring. She could see the panic radiating from Devon. Is it Dominic? Is he okay? Dominic is fine physically, Devon replied, running a hand over his face. But I just got off the phone with Tessa. She's a wreck, Sharon. She's completely devastated. Mariah just demanded a divorce. Sharon gasped, her hand flying to her chest. A divorce, but they were just... I knew they were having some friction, but a divorce, out of nowhere. It gets worse, Devon said, leaning in closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Tessa said Mariah is demanding half of everything they own, trying to freeze her out completely. And, Sharon, she threatened to come after Dominic. The color drained from Sharon's face. What? That's impossible. She can't do that. Tessa said Mariah is threatening that if Tessa tries to have a child with someone else, she's going to launch a full-scale custody battle for Dominic. She told Tessa she'd use the courts to prove Tessa is emotionally unstable, dragging my son Abby and myself into a legal circus just to punish her. Devon's voice shook with a dangerous mix of fear and protective fury. Sharon, I am Dominic's biological father. I love Mariah for what she did for us, for bringing him into this world. But if she threatens my son's stability, if she tries to use him as a pawn in a divorce settlement, I will fight back with everything I have. Devon, please, you have to understand, Sharon pleaded, stepping out from behind the counter to grab his arm. Her heart was breaking for her daughter, the terrifying realization of Mariah's mental state crashing down upon her. She's not in her right mind. You know what she went through. The kidnapping, being locked in that room while pregnant, the separation anxiety after she handed Dominic over. We all thought she had worked through the worst of her postpartum depression, but this is a total psychological break. She's projecting all her pain and fear of abandonment onto Tessa, and she's grasping at the one thing that made her feel important, Dominic. I know she's hurting, Sharon Devon said, his tone softening slightly, though the fierce protective edge remained. I am incredibly worried about her. We all are. But I cannot let her drag a baby into her emotional collapse. We need to find the root cause of this sudden escalation. Why today? Why this extreme reaction? Something must have triggered her to snap like this. I don't know, Sharon whispered, tears welling in her eyes as she looked out the window of the coffee shop, feeling utterly helpless. But I need to find her, before she does something she can never ever undo. The news of Mariah's catastrophic meltdown spread through the elite circles of Genoa City like wildfire, eventually reaching the grand opulent halls of the Chancellor Mansion. Abby Newman, Abbot Chancellor, sat in the nursery, the soft pastel walls and the gentle hum of the baby monitor providing no comfort against the storm raging in her mind. She held Dominic tightly against her chest, her chin resting on his soft dark hair. The baby cooed softly, completely oblivious to the legal and emotional hurricane threatening to engulf his peaceful existence. Abby's eyes were red-rimmed, her heart aching with a profound, suffocating sorrow. When Devon had called her to explain the situation, her initial reaction had been absolute disbelief, followed rapidly by an all-consuming maternal terror. Mariah, the woman who had given her the ultimate gift, the woman who had sacrificed her body and her safety to bring Dominic into the world, was now positioning herself as the greatest threat to his family. I won't let her take you, Abby whispered into the quiet room, her arms tightening protectively around her son. I won't let anyone take you. Abby was heartbroken. She had considered Mariah a part of their extended, unconventional family. She had watched Mariah struggle, had tried to offer grace and space when Mariah's attachment to the baby had crossed the line into unhealthy obsession in the past. They had moved past it, or so Abby had thought. To hear that Mariah was now weaponizing Dominic, threatening to drag his name through family court to exact revenge on Tessa, was a betrayal that cut deeper than bone. She was also deeply worried for Dominic. Even if Mariah's legal threats were baseless, even if no judge in the state of Wisconsin would grant custody to a surrogate under these circumstances, the sheer media spectacle, the depositions, the psychological evaluation, it would create a toxic environment around her son. And what if Mariah's lawyers found a loophole? What if they spun a narrative that Abby and Chance's home was somehow unstable? The anxiety was paralyzing. Abby rocked back and forth, tears dripping silently onto Dominic's blanket. She was watching the woman who helped build her family actively try to destroy it, and she felt entirely powerless to stop the impending collision. The situation escalated with a terrifying, unrelenting speed over the next 48 hours. Mariah did not answer her phone. She ignored frantic texts from Sharon, ignored voicemails from Devon, pleading for a rational conversation, and completely blocked Tessa on every conceivable platform. Mariah had retreated into a fortress of her own making, fueled by a toxic cocktail of grief, paranoia, and a desperate need to inflict the pain she was feeling onto the person she blamed for it. In a high-rise office building downtown, Mariah sat across from one of the most ruthless family law attorneys in Genoa City. The mahogany desk between them was littered with financial statements, marriage certificates, and surrogacy contracts. Mariah's face was a mask of cold, unyielding stone as she reviewed the documents. You understand that pursuing custody of the Chancellor baby is a highly unorthodox maneuver? Miss Copeland, the lawyer, asked, peering at her over the rim of his glasses. The courts strongly favor the legal and biological parents. Proving Miss Porter's emotional instability is one thing, but tying it to a custody bid for a child you surrendered legal rights to, it will be a bloodbath. I don't care, Mariah said, her voice devoid of any human warmth. File the injunctions on the bank accounts. Serve Tessa with the divorce papers, the asset division demands, and the notice of intent regarding Dominic. I want her to wake up every single morning terrified of what I'm going to take from her next. The lawyer nodded, recognizing a client driven by pure vengeance, a lucrative if destructive combination. As you wish. The papers will be served today. Later that afternoon, Tessa was sitting on the edge of the bed in their half-empty apartment. The silence of the space was deafening. She hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. Her eyes were swollen shut from crying, her mind spinning in an endless loop of confusion and despair. How had they gone from planning their future to this apocalyptic nightmare in the span of a single day? A sharp, authoritative knock at the front door made her jump. Tessa dragged herself to the door, her hand trembling as she unlocked the deadbolt. A man in a nondescript suit stood in the hallway holding a thick manila envelope. "Tessa Porter," he asked, his tone flat and professional. "Yes, Tessa," croaked her throat raw. "You've been served," he said, thrusting the envelope into her hands before turning on his heel and walking away down the corridor.